We've arrived at John chapter 4, which is one of the most famous stories of the Bible about the woman at the well. Let me read that to you. The Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but the disciples. When the Lord heard of this, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now, he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Because Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God, and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his flocks and herds?" And Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say that you have no husband. The fact is that you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you've said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." And Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I who speak to you am he." Well, a remarkable passage and a remarkable story. It starts off with Jesus in retreat. It says that the Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who was baptized but the disciples. And when the Lord learned of this, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now, the interesting question is, why would he do that? What's the issue here? Is he afraid of the Pharisees? Is he running away from them? Is he worried about something the Pharisees might do to him? When he was obviously making a name for himself, obviously someone who was beginning and starting to eclipse the ministry of John the Baptist, it meant that he was coming into huge prominence amongst the people and amongst the leaders of the people. So what was the fact that Jesus had heard that the Pharisees were now understanding that he was now becoming the main player in this religious revolution? Well, it seems to me it could be for a number of reasons. The first could be that he didn't wish to draw attention to himself so strongly at this particular point. John the Baptist was still doing an important job in preparing the way, and he certainly understood that he was detracting from the role that John the Baptist was playing just by being there. If the Pharisees knew it, then everybody knew it, and Jesus may not have wanted to have eclipsed John quite so soon, but we can't be sure. It could also be that, and this is tied up with the same idea, that Jesus, who did not want to provoke the Pharisees so strongly at this early point in his ministry, decided that the best choice was to move away from Jerusalem and go back into Judea, and left to go back into Galilee, I should say. And the whole idea here then is it's tied up with the idea of timing. Jesus has got a ministry to serve. He has a job to do. He has teaching to give. He has disciples to create. He has miracles and signs to perform. And he has a message to deliver like no other message has ever been delivered. And for that is allocated approximately 3 years. But he wants to make sure that that time is not cut short. He doesn't wish to precipitate the confrontation that occurred at the end of his ministry when he did quite deliberately trigger that confrontation through the second cleansing of the temple. And so it seems to me, at any rate, that this is an act of strategy, whereby his ministry is laid out before him. It's carefully planned. He knows that this is not the time to provoke a problem with the Pharisees, and so he withdraws. He goes back to Galilee, and as far as the Pharisees are concerned, problem over. It puts John the Baptist back into the highlight, and he becomes the centre of attention once more, and that's something which was to John's cost, as we see a little bit later. But whatever the reason, and I think that's probably what this is about, that Jesus has withdrawn back to Galilee once more. On his way to Galilee, he has to pass through Samaria, and so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar. Now, there is a background here, and that the Samaritans and the Jews were, although neighbours, not the best of company for each other. They had different religious views, they had different opinions about how to worship God and where to worship God, and in fact the division was so strong they didn't even talk to each other. They would pass through without a by your leave or a single word. So here is Jesus in a place which essentially is alien, friendless, which wouldn't provide him with anything of support in any way, because it was a Samaritan area. So Jesus rests. He's been walking many, many miles with his disciples. The disciples, it says, have gone off to get some food, and Jesus has rested against this well. This is a historical well. It's a plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph way back in Genesis. And Jacob's well had been there for that length of time, maybe getting on for 1,000 years or so. And Jesus was tired from the journey. He sat down by the well, and it was about the 6th hour, so we're coming towards the end of the day and evening. At this point, the Samaritan woman came to draw water. Now, in order to draw water at the well, you have to have something to throw down into the well on a long string or rope of some kind, which was not part of the well itself. In those days, you'd use a kind of a wine skin, and you could throw it down and then draw it back up again, and the wineskin or the skin itself would contain some kind of water. But you'd need some long string or rope in order to do that. You don't think of it like a picturesque English well with a nice little roof and cupola and such like on it, and a turning handle. Nothing like that at all. Just a hole with probably a brick wall or low brick wall around it. That was about it. You can see such a typical well if you watch movies in Lawrence of Arabia, and Lawrence is drawing water in the same kind of way. But here we now have Jesus on his own, and this woman comes along. Remember, a Samaritan woman. And Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" Now, this is important to get this clear. There are some people who said that Jesus Christ did not come in the flesh, and that he was the Son of God in a kind of spiritual form. This gives the lie to that, because Jesus was clearly thirsty. He ate and he drank as everyone else did, and despite the high regard that John holds Jesus in, he's very clear that he became flesh. The Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. And that means that you're made out of a body with blood, bone, nerve, sinew, all the frailties of flesh and all the weaknesses thereof are embedded in this physical nature and frame that we have. So Jesus could get hungry and thirsty in the same way that we would get hungry and thirsty. And at this point, he was probably very thirsty, and the idea of being quite frustrated here, of sitting next to a well with plenty of water, probably waiting for someone to come along so that he could ask for a drink because he didn't have anything to draw with. And along comes this woman with some kind of a skin on a rope and ready to draw water. And the Samaritan woman, after hearing what he has to say, "Will you give me a drink?" is startled, because he says, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" So strong was the division between the Jews and the Samaritans. So much did the Jews despise the Samaritans and look down on the Samaritans. One gets the impression they would rather go thirsty than actually ask someone for a drink who was a Samaritan. This is kind of such a strong taboo is what we're getting. How could you, even though you're thirsty, maybe even dying of thirst, I'd rather die of thirst than ask a Samaritan for a drink, is the kind of impression that one's getting of the division. But so surprised was she then that the Jew, this Jewish man, Jesus, was able to break this, that she was surprised that he was willing to do so. And Jesus answered him, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." Now, this phrase, living water, is completely new to the woman here. She clearly not understood what this phrase meant, but it's not new to the Bible. There are a couple of mentions of living water already in the scriptures, and Jesus seems to have been the kind of person here who had pored over the scriptures and understood every nuance of it. The Spirit of God given to him without measure is something which instructs him in this way. And he had an understanding of the Old Testament in a way which not even the scribes and Pharisees ever could understand. He had a spiritual understanding of it. So the first mention of it you find in Jeremiah and in chapter 2. And let me read to you, this is in verse 13. I'll read from verse 12 to give a little bit of context here. "Be appalled at this, O heavens, and shudder with great horror, declares the Lord, because my people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and they have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Now, this is another metaphor. And Jesus loves to speak in metaphors because what metaphors do is they unite together two or three or more different ideas together which don't have a natural link unless you can see the spiritual truth within them. And that's why almost every instance that Jesus speaks, there's some metaphorical content to it. We mustn't forget that because that's a great help to us in understanding the way in which he talks. Here the metaphor is clear. They've forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Living water was, I think, a term in those days which meant bubbling, gurgling, flowing water. This tended to be cleaner than the stagnant still water that would be held in a well. And that bubbling spring water was much, much more refreshing, much cleaner, much nicer to drink than any water which you would find in a deep, dark pit somewhere. Nevertheless, if that's the only water you've got, you drink from the well. Living water then has this connotation of being the better quality of water, but it's more than just water here. Though in Jeremiah, what you have is this contrast between I'm the fount of living water, God. I provide you with the necessities of life and refreshment and everything that's worth having, and you have forsaken me, even though I give you the very best, the best kind of water, and you have instead preferred to have the stagnant water that you find in wells or cisterns, which is still water, doesn't taste or refresh anywhere near as well, in an inadequate supply of water, and even that the cisterns are broken so the water flows away, so it's not even water there. And you have forsaken me, says the God of Jeremiah, in that kind of way, despite the fact that what you've replaced me with is not wholly inadequate, but even vacuous and empty and useless. So, living water first appears in Jeremiah. You also find it in Zechariah. And in Zechariah chapters 13 and in particular chapter 14, you find that there is a reference to the future, a coming day. In Zechariah 13, on that day, a fountain will be opened to the house of David, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and impurity. On that day, I will banish the names of idols from the land. Verse 4, on that day, every prophet will be ashamed of his prophetic vision. He will not put on a prophet's garments of hair to disorder to deceive. And goes on in chapter 14. On that day there will be no light, no cold, no frost. It will be a unique day, without daytime or nighttime, a day known to the Lord when everything comes. And there will be light. When evening comes, there will be light. And verse 8 of chapter 14, on that day living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half to the eastern sea and half to the western sea, in summer and in winter. So here we have a picture then of a time coming in the future when God will provide living water, a refreshment. You have to understand this is all set in the context of a desert people, a desert country, the desert area of Israel, Judea, where water itself was not only a very precious commodity, but it was a refreshing, reviving, enlivening, life-giving quality. People died through lack of water, through lack of thirst. So water here is a picture of having life itself and the refreshment of life itself. That's the idea of living water. The best water you have is the running, gurgling, pure, clear spring water. And that provides a refreshment that could be considered unparalleled if you just come out of a desert hot, thirsty, and sore-footed. So Jesus is now taking this picture from the Old Testament, and he's saying to the woman, if you knew the gift of God, and the gift of God here must be the refreshment that God provides, the life-giving refreshment that God provides, typified by this water, and who it is who asks you for a drink, in other words, me being the Son of God, who has the power to bestow this gift on people, then you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. Now, we extend the metaphor here because this life-giving, fresh, clear water, which is essential to living, particularly in a desert country, is something which is now pictured here as something beyond mere water, but something which gives life in and of itself, particularly in a spiritual context. Jesus raises the metaphor to a higher level. So living water then becomes that picture of that thing which, if he bestows it upon you, you will have life in abundance and in refreshment, spiritual life, and a life which will encompass you and all the things that you need and will raise you to a level of spiritual refreshment that only Jesus can provide. This is the idea behind it. If you'd listen to me, if you asked of me, I can provide you with this kind of refreshment. Sir, the woman said, you've got nothing to draw with, and the well is deep, so you're not going to get hold of any water, in other words. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and flocks and herds? Now, she's saying that I'm still thinking on a lower level. I'm still thinking of a physical water level because you've asked me for a drink, which is a physical drink. And I can see that there's no way for you to get a drink, even though you're sitting by a well. And yet you say you can give me water. That doesn't make any sense. How can you give me living water, even better water than in this well, when you don't have anything to draw from? Are you claiming that you have some supernatural powers? Are you a person who is greater than the person who actually created the well in the first place? Even he had to draw with something to draw with, some skins and some rope. Even he had to do it ordinarily, and yet you claim you can provide this better quality of water. So her mind is on this lower level, and again we see constantly this same issue that comes about whenever Jesus encounters somebody. He speaks in a language and with words which raise the quality of what he's talking about to the level of metaphoric language, talking of heavenly things to earthly people. And they don't properly understand what he's saying, at least in the first instance. He spoke to Nicodemus about being born again, and Nicodemus betrays his earthly mindedness by saying, how can a man go back into his mother's womb and be born again? That doesn't make any sense to me. It's a nonsense, Jesus. And similarly, this woman is saying the same kind of thing. This, what you've just said to me, is a nonsense. How can you do such a thing? You're not even able to draw any water. You claiming to be better than Jacob, who provided the well. And so there's this gulf between the way in which Jesus speaks and the way in which people understand. And Jesus spoke almost all the time in this higher level plane of thinking. And we must have that forever in our minds when we read about the words that Jesus said, because only then will we have an insight into properly understanding what he means. Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water that I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. So, Jesus doesn't wish to leave people with the wrong impression. He does seek to explain to the woman the difference between the two things. This water is of an earthly kind, a physical kind, a base kind, ordinary water. I'm not talking about that kind of water. I'm talking about a different kind of water. And if you can understand me and understand the words I'm saying to you, then you will understand what this means. So he's quite clear. Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. That's the quality of ordinary water. But the quality of water, the living water I'm talking about, whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Now let's be plain here. He's not talking about water of any kind. He's talking about what the water symbolizes, what the water means, and that is a refreshment of mind and spirit. It's a refreshment that comes to people with an enlightenment and an understanding of truths which were hidden and dark in the past. It's a refreshment which comes to you when you gain a deep understanding of the things of God, which can reorientate your life and set you on a proper course. That's the kind of refreshment of life that he's talking about. And this, an amazing way of speaking and talking to people, but one which is the only possible way if you really want to understand these spiritual truths. Whoever drinks the water I give him, that means whoever listens to the words that I say, the meanings that I convey, the truth that I impress upon you. Anyone who listens to that will never thirst. They never need to go looking for the truth anywhere. They won't need to because they will already have the truth because I'm providing it for them. People who are in darkness are always searching for light. People who are mired in a pile of lies and deceit are always searching for the truth. And if you listen to what I have to say, says Jesus, you'll never have to worry about that again. You'll never thirst again. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Now that's interesting because it means that the words that Jesus gives, this water of life, this living water, this is something which will promote within you a spring of its own kind. It will spring up within you. It's not just the water which I give you, which opens up your heart and mind, and that's it. But having had your heart and mind opened to this new refreshment of life, that itself becomes a bubbling stream within you. And that will be a continual source of refreshment in your life spiritually. The idea here is the idea of the Spirit, really, the Spirit within you, providing for you a constant connection with the truth of God, a constant way of seeing from the correct perspective, how to view your life and how to view it from a God-oriented point of view, how to see things in a spiritual way, in the way that Jesus saw them and the way in which he spoke about them. So the water I'll give you will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life, and that, he says, is something which will lead you towards life eternal. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." Now, it's absolutely clear from what she's saying that she still hasn't got the picture of the difference, the gulf between the earthly and the spiritual. And she's thinking that in the same way that Nicodemus thought about rebirth, that it's a physical thing and there is some kind of water which will stop you from getting thirsty again, And you can tell that she's thinking on this earthly, foolish plane of thinking that by giving you this water, I don't have to come back to the well again. It was a huge burden. She probably had to go to the well 2 or 3 times a day, drawing water and walking maybe a mile or 2 to get there, maybe even longer than that. It's a huge burden. She doesn't want to keep doing that all the time, fetching water for different people in the household. However, Jesus is not talking about that kind of water, and she shows by her obtuseness that she hasn't realized that there's a metaphorical meaning to all of this. Jesus doesn't want to get into explaining this any further, but rather he uses more of a shock tactic here. And it's an interesting thing which you might consider a diversion, but in reality would I say he's given up on trying to explain the idea to her. This is someone whose mind is so set on earthly things she can't see heavenly truths. He told her, "Go and call your husband and come back." Now, that's quite a brutal kind of comment. I don't want to talk to you any further. I'll talk to your husband. But he knows full well that that's going to prompt a reply, because when he asks that question, it's not really that she expects her to go away and come back talking to her husband, but there is an implication here that I can't talk to you about this. Go and call your husband. Maybe he can explain it to you. The idea is if I explain it to your husband will explain it to you. And there may be some element of, let's call it frustration, with the woman's spiritual obtuseness. She's not a spiritually alive person. "I have no husband," she replied. Now here we come to something which is remarkable and difficult to explain. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say that you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now know, or now have, is not your husband. What you've said is quite true." Now, you can view this, I suppose, as a kind of supernatural knowledge. How did Jesus know about the woman? It has echoes of the Nathanael episode where Jesus said to Nathanael, "I saw you under the fig tree," and Nathanael was astonished that he had some knowledge of what he was doing, which no one else knew about, but Jesus knew about it, even though he was miles and miles away. Here you have a similar kind of situation. Jesus said, "You've had 5 husbands. The man you now have is not your husband." There's a kind of supernatural insight here. I suppose it is possible that somehow or other, when the disciples had arrived, or maybe there had been some other issues going on, that someone had pointed out the woman who was some way away maybe, and said, "Oh yes, she's so-and-so, her name is this, she's on her 6th husband, or the 6th bloke she's with, she's had 5 husbands," and she was notorious for that. There aren't many people who would have 5 husbands. I think Elizabeth Taylor might have had something like that. I can't remember. But, it's a remarkable and unusual occurrence. So she would have been well known within her community as a woman who had 5 husbands and now has a 6th one, or 6th partner of some kind. Well known. And it's possible that that might have been conveyed to Jesus by some means or other. I think that unlikely. I think it unlikely because it stands in direct parallel to the Nathanael issue. And it's funny how most of these stories in John draw up the same kind of event that's taking place, and yet just slightly different. So because Nathanael couldn't have, from the face of it, have been, Jesus could not have been informed of what he was doing because it was before anyone had gone to see him. That was clearly a supernatural knowledge. And here we see some other kind of supernatural knowledge too, a kind of omniscience which Jesus had an insight into things which other people didn't have. there's a supernatural element here which I find very difficult to dismiss. You remember my earlier rule that if it's possible to view things in a naturalistic way, then please do so, without drawing on the supernatural necessarily. But here I'm having difficulty finding a natural explanation, so I will accept the fact that this is another demonstration that Jesus had some supernatural, beyond normal knowledge and insight into this lady's past. The implications of that are huge, by the way, because it may well be that means that Jesus had this supernatural knowledge about anyone or everyone, and that is incomprehensibly large or big to see. So we have to leave that to one side and just say that that's the best we can understand about it. He goes on. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. Well, prophets were people who knew things which were supernatural. So this is something which the woman herself declares, that you know something about me which nobody else can know. Only God could know this, and the prophet is the mouthpiece of God. Okay, I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers, that's interesting, because she's now confronted with someone who she believes has a direct line to insight, to knowledge from God himself, being a prophet. There's been a question which clearly has been preying on her mind for some time. It's like, you finally find that you've got to see the person who knows all things and can sort things out. And there's one question that I've been trying to grapple with, and which maybe our whole community is trying to grapple with, and which defines our community more than anything else, and I want to know the answer to it. And it's this question of Samaritans' worship on this mountain. Now, Jerusalem had a temple, and the temple was built, and the Jews went and worshipped in the temple. Samaritans weren't allowed to worship in the temple because they didn't have any dealings with Jews. They worshipped instead on a holy mountain. And this was kind of like the dividing line between the two. They both worshipped the same God, but the Samaritans were not allowed to go to Jerusalem and worship there. Instead, they worshipped on the mountain. Now, because that's a dividing factor that divides Jews from Samaritans, what is the right answer? Where should we worship? The Samaritans say we should worship on the mountain. The Jews say you should worship in the temple. Which is the right one? And this question is so deeply rooted in her that that's the next thing that she brings out. It's something which has been weighing on her whole community probably as something which needs an answer. Here I've got a prophet in front of me. Decide this issue. And Jesus does. He doesn't shirk that one. He says, believe me, woman, a time is coming, so shades of Zechariah again, when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. In other words, the place is not important. The mountain is not important. Even the temple is not important. Why? Because they're going to pass away. Or rather, the use to which they're put will pass away. You Samaritans worship what you don't know, whereas we worship what we do know, because salvation is from the Jews. Now, that's a clear statement that the Samaritans got it wrong, really. That worship of God must take place in the temple of God. And that's fundamental as far as Jesus is concerned. The temple where the sacrifices were being made. No sacrifices on the mount as far as I'm aware. So Jesus is putting the record straight. So the Samaritans were an offshoot of the true religion. You didn't know what you were really doing when you set up worship of God on the mountain. You probably made that up because you didn't have access to anything else, and you didn't know what you were doing. But we Jews, we know what we are doing. We know what it's about. We have the direct revelation of God because salvation is from the Jews. And that's interesting too, that salvation is from the Jews. He could have said salvation is to the Jews. He could have said it's to the Jews only. You Samaritans are excluded. It's got nothing to do with you. We don't have anything to do with you. Salvation's got nothing to do with you. Salvation is for the Jews, not for you. But you know what? He didn't say that. He said it's from the Jews, and that's a very, very important preposition, from the Jews. That means that if it comes from the Jews, it goes to everywhere else. It goes to the world. It goes to those who are not Jews. It originates with the Jews, but it doesn't end with the Jews. So salvation, he says, is from the Jews. And yet a time is coming and has now come. Now that's an important element too, because it's come with Jesus. For the time is coming, that means it's been predicted in the Old Testament. We've said a day is coming. Again, we've got shades of Zechariah here. A day is coming when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. What Jesus is saying here, particularly with these words, and now has come, meaning it's come at this moment. It's come with my coming. It's come with my presence here in the world. I have brought a change about. A change which was predicted because a time is coming, as the prophets have said. It's now come because I've come. And so I am, therefore, the fulfillment of all of those prophecies of the Old Testament. I am the fulfillment, and the promise is delivered here and now. So he's saying a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers, the implication being that there are false worshippers or worshippers in vain, people who are doing it for lip service, who do it for ritual, who do it for the sake of tradition, who do it for the sake of custom, but not from the heart because they really wish a relationship with God. Then the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, because they're the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. In other words, it's not tied down to physical places like the mountain. Otherwise, we'd all have to go to the mountain and worship God. It's not tied to the temple. Otherwise, we'd all have to go to a temple to worship God. It's not tied to a church either. It's not tied to any physical thing because it's a spiritual act. And the spiritual act can take place anywhere because it's an act of the heart and of the mind and of a God who is immediately available to all those who would reach out for him. You worship him in spirit and in truth. The truth is important as well because you can't have the one without the other. You can only have a spiritual understanding if you have the truth that Jesus is providing here, a true understanding of the nature of God and of the world that we live in and how we relate to God. Worshipping God in spirit and in truth, which means from the heart, which means in reality, not through ritual or dead observances, is the kind of worship that the Father is looking for, it says here. The Father seeks. Seeking is quite a powerful word too, because it means that God is actively searching for such people. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth. It's kind of a truism, kind of saying which is kind of obvious, really. But there are those people who do not worship in spirit, and there are many those who don't worship in truth. There are many in churches today whose worship is not spirit-led or spirit-filled, but rather ritual-led, ritual-filled. And ritual is just another term for going through the motions, doing what we're supposed to do. And yet there is no real life within it. And there are many who worship without truth, who are led by, let's say, things which maybe the world has made up for itself, or people have made up for themselves. They seemed good to them in their own eyes. They thought they were the right kind of thing to do, like maybe worshipping on this mountain, but they're not the real thing. And Jesus said the real worshippers have both a spiritual, heartfelt inclination and also the truth as well. The woman said, I know that the Messiah, called the Christ, is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us. In other words, she's quite openly honest about the fact that there's lots of things we don't understand, lots of things I don't understand. There are many spiritual truths, and the things you're talking about, I don't think I fully understand those, is what she's basically saying. But, although you're speaking in riddles, and here is a kind of contrast here, although you're speaking in words that I don't follow, all this talk about living water and all of this kind of stuff, which I don't follow really, and yet when the Messiah comes, he's going to make it clear to me, and I will understand then. There's a kind of a contradiction in Jesus' reply here. It's a forthright reply. It's a clear-cut reply. And it's a claim of authority reply. I am he. I am that Christ that you're looking for and expecting. I am that Messiah that's been prophesied from long ago. And let there be no doubt about it. There's no dispute. I'm not shying away from the fact I am that person. I am the fulfillment of the promise. And any explanation that you're getting on spiritual things, it has to come through me.